you sure you're living your life?
Be honest. When was the last time you made a decision without wondering what others might think? When did you act not out of habit, not from fear, not to meet expectations, but from a raw, inexplicable impulse that felt entirely your own? Or have you, like so many, become a prisoner of invisible rules, carefully laid by your own hands?
Built from approval, fear, and the craving to belong.
You're not in a cell, there are no bars, but it still feels like you're suffocating. That weight in your chest, it's not just anxiety, it's the aching grief for a life you're not truly living. As if each day you put on a mask, you smile when you want to scream, you agree when your soul protests, and you craft an acceptable self, hoping the applause from others will quiet the emptiness inside. But let's ask the real question: who asked you to live like this? Who demanded your perfection, your constant compliance, your invulnerability? No one. You chose this. Bit by bit, year by year, you became a construct of other people's expectations. You've mastered being pleasant, responsible, productive, and in doing so, you lost the most important thing, your own essence. Inner imprisonment is the cruelest kind. You may be admired, even inspiring, but feel like a puppet inside, strings pulled by unseen hands of public opinion. And here's the paradox. You're holding those strings yourself. You tied them. You keep them taut. You were taught that control equals power, that if you manage every piece of your life, you'll achieve peace, success, harmony. But here's the truth. The more you try to control, the less alive you feel. You're constantly living in the future, planning, optimizing, calculating. Meanwhile, the present slips by, leaving behind only the dull ache of something vital you can't quite name. That's why even with all your outward achievements, you sometimes wake up with an inexplicable emptiness. Because your victories, your relationships, even your thoughts, they often aren't yours. They're the byproduct of overthinking, people-pleasing, fear. And the real you, the you that once felt wild and whole, has been buried under all that noise. In the 16th century, a philosopher who withdrew from society into his stone tower stumbled on a truth the modern world still avoids. Freedom doesn't begin with struggle, it begins with stepping back. Michel de Montaigne wrote that detaching from the role play of the world is not weakness, but the highest wisdom. He saw clearly we are not prisoners of the world. We are captives of illusion. The illusion that pleasing others saves us, that success will bring calm, that control protects us well. But what if it's the opposite? What if your obsession with being correct, liked, in charge is exactly what's killing your spirit? What if by loosening the rope you grip so tightly you don't fall but breathe for the first time? Think about it. If you're terrified to let go of control, maybe it's because you no longer know who you are without it. Maybe behind the persona you perform, there's no clear self left, but buried in that fear is the beginning of liberation. You don't need to know who you'll become. You only need to stop being who you are not. Yes, it's frightening, but isn't it more terrifying to live a perfectly organized life that never once felt like yours? Freedom begins with an internal shift, not destruction, not escape, but the quiet courage to put down the armor, to admit you're exhausted, that you no longer want to perform, and to let yourself, however clumsily, be real. Because if we're honest, everything you fear losing, is it truly worth the cost of a life unlived? So now at the end of this first chapter, I ask again, are you really living your life, or just performing a convenient version of it for someone else's comfort? What remains of you when everything else is stripped away? You've grown used to yourself, more rather to the version of you that you've presented to the world. Used to the habits, the reactions, the way your name sounds in other people's mouths. You've become an image, polished, familiar, socially acceptable. But here's the question. If you stripped all of that away, the masks, the habits, the rehearsed phrases, the reflexive responses, would there be anything left that's truly you? Most people aren't afraid of change. They're afraid of losing their identity, of discovering that without the role, there's only a void. And perhaps that's the most frightening truth of all, that we've built ourselves so long in response to the outer world, we've forgotten how our voice sounds without the echo of expectation. Look at your life. How many of your choices were made sincerely, not out of fear, not out of duty, not because it's the right thing? How many words have you said because you wanted to, and not because it was expected? How many paths have you taken without checking how it would look to others? This is where Montaigne becomes especially relevant. He wasn't a hermit in the usual sense. He didn't reject the world, he simply stopped being its hostage. Retreating to his tower, he engaged in the most dangerous act of all, honest contemplation of the self. Not to impress, not to seem wise, but to stop being false. He didn't write for fame, he wrote to understand, and to understand he had to be willing to tear down everything he thought he was. Truth, more often than not, isn't found through adding, but through shedding. And this is where the real fear arises. What if after all the layers are gone, there's nothing left? But fear isn't a reason to run from truth. Fear is a sign that you're close, that you're standing at the edge. And this edge, that's where freedom begins. Stripping away the old self is not death, it's return. Letting go of the imposed identity isn't loss, it's clarity. It's not disappearance, it's revelation. Only by ceasing to be what you are not can you begin to sense what you've always been but never allowed yourself to be. With every step inward, you lose something external. Yes, it might feel like you're losing friends, roles, status, but in truth, you're only shedding what was never anchored in truth to begin with. Real connections don't vanish when you become authentic. On the contrary, that's when they're born. You fear disappointing others, but you don't notice that you've already disappointed yourself by silently agreeing to live a scripted life. You fear loneliness, but fail to see you're already alone if those around you love only your mask. So who are you without the mask? Who are you without your job, your titles, even your appearance? You're not a collection of functions. You are not a polished project. You are a consciousness capable of choosing, of hurting, of being honest, of failing. You're not a brand, you're a possibility. And that possibility only unfolds when you allow yourself to be imperfect. The world demands stability. People want you to be consistent, but life is not built on linear patterns. Neither are you. You are contradiction. You are exploration. You are a story still being written. To accept this means abandoning the obsessive need to define yourself once and for all. It means allowing yourself to be in motion, and even in your broken pieces, to see a path, not a defeat. When you strip down to your core, you become vulnerable, yes, but it's precisely that vulnerability that leads to real strength. Where there is no armor, there is depth. Where there is no script, something real begins to speak. And strangely, in that nakedness, you finally begin to feel alive. Montaigne wrote, "I am not ashamed to admit that I do not know myself," because confession is the first step. Confession that you are not a finished sculpture, but a process, not a fixed image, but a living movement. Maybe everything you thought was a mistake was actually a search. Everything you hid was a truth. Everything you ran from was the road back home. You don't need to understand it all at once. You don't need to be heroic. You don't need to fit the mold. Your only true obligation is to be honest with yourself, because self-deception, that's the real prison. No key, no door, no air. But if you've come this far, you've already begun to unlock it from within, maybe slowly, maybe uncertainly, but you are remembering. And what remains of you when everything else is stripped away, what remains is truth, wordless, formless. You, the version of you that existed before you decided to be convenient, before the gazes, before the fear, before the lie. And perhaps that's where real freedom begins, in that quiet, breathless, unadorned I. You're still holding on. Even after you have started to see the cracks, feel the falseness, hear that quiet voice within, you're clinging to the rope of control as if it's the only thing keeping you from falling into the abyss, because that's how you were taught. If you let go, everything will fall apart. Since childhood, you've been trained, plan ahead, be prepared, don't miss your chance, never show weakness. There's logic in that, there's structure, but there's no life, because life doesn't obey. It doesn't fit into neat boxes, and it especially resists being micromanaged out of fear. Control, contrary to what you've been told, is not safety. It's confinement. It doesn't bring stability. It brings the illusion of stability. It's a subtle, nearly invisible trap. You live in tension, not just because you fear failure, but even more so because you fear spontaneity. You want to foresee, predict, prevent, but in doing so, you close yourself off from the very essence of existence. It's unpredictability, and in trying to grasp control, you become not its master, but its servant, a servant of anxiety, perfectionism, fear. History is filled with those who tried to control everything and were ultimately undone by it. Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher on the throne, understood this danger. In his meditations, he wrote, "Life is a stream. Don't try to hold the water in your hands." He was right. Trying to control life, people, emotions, outcomes is like trying to hold a river with your palm. The tighter you squeeze, the less remains. Even Marcus, with authority over an empire, knew that true power lies in acceptance. He didn't try to control everyone. He focused on governing himself, not the event, but his response to it. And that is the key. You're afraid to let go because deep down you believe, if I don't hold everything together, no one will. If you loosen your grip, chaos will take over. But that belief itself is the prison. In truth, the more you try to control everything, the further you drift from your own center. You start living in hypothetical scenarios. What if logically, suppose, component placement, I must prepare for, and you lose touch with the present, with your breath, with your body, with reality. You're stuck in the future or trapped in the past, but almost never here and now. When you begin to release control, at first it will feel terrifying, like falling, like chaos. But through that chaos, something real starts to emerge. Because where there is no rigid control, there is life, real flexibility, spontaneity, openness. Montaigne wrote that there is no perfect order, only the appropriate moment. He didn't strive for error-free living. He learned to listen to the day, the body, the feeling, the circumstances. And that's profound wisdom, because control is a refusal to listen. It is force. It is deafness. But life requires listening, attunement, openness. Make your plans, but don't become their prisoner. Set your goals, but don't measure your worth by achieving them. The world changes. You change. Adaptation is not weakness, it's maturity. Letting go of total control is not a collapse. It's a release, Because when you release, you begin to trust not someone else, not fate, yourself, your inner compass, your ability to respond rather than react, to feel rather than analyze, and in that trust, real freedom begins. Ironically, those who cling to control the most are often those who trust themselves the least. They fear chaos because they fear their own reaction to it. But those who've learned to hear themselves, they don't fear the unknown because they know everything they need is already inside. This doesn't mean drifting aimlessly. It means not resisting every wave, not trying to command the wind, but learning to move with it. It means being alive. And now, if you start to listen, you'll notice something. The less you cling, the more comes to you. The more you loosen your grip, the more remains in your hands. And right there, in that moment of letting go, a strength is born that needs no explanation. It simply is. You already feel it. Something has shifted. Something inside has grown less tolerant of lies. Even the most refined ones, especially the ones you tell yourself. You've started to listen more closely to the silence between words, to the pauses in conversations, to the weariness behind smiles. And now you face the most difficult challenge yet, authenticity. Authenticity isn't a trend, it's not an aesthetic of vulnerability, it's not about being yourself on Instagram. It's the process of dismantling everything that is not you. It's pain because so much in your life was built on a false foundation. And if we're brutally honest, to be authentic means being willing to lose everything, or rather to re-examine everything. Do you know who you are when there's no one to impress? When there's no need to be strong, smart, or successful? Who are you in your imperfection, your uncertainty, in that quiet voice inside that doesn't want to comply? Authenticity is not comfort, it's confrontation. Because the world is not always kind to those who show their real face. Society loves masks, smiling, confident, stable, but you are being offered something else, to take it all off and step into the light, even if blindly. Socrates, one of the first who consciously walked the path of inner truth, was executed for exactly that, not for what he did, but for what he thought. For refusing to lie to himself and others. He was inconvenient. He asked questions that were too honest, and his honesty shattered the status quo. He didn't rebel, he simply was. And that was enough for society to reject him. But this is the essence of authenticity. It will always cost you something. Attention, popularity, sometimes comfort, because being real means going against the current, and more often against yourself, against that trained version of you that learned to smooth things over, hide, appease. You don't have to be a hero, but authenticity requires courage, because it's not about being perfect, it's about being alive. And to truly live means to risk being misunderstood, rejected, ridiculed. This is where most people retreat. They return to the comfort of the mask, because the mask protects. The mask is currency in the marketplace of social acceptance, but it comes at a high cost. You lose yourself, piece by piece, gesture by gesture, until all that's left is the performance you've learned to play. But if you dare to go further, you'll discover something extraordinary. Authenticity strips away the inessential. It breaks false bonds, but strengthens real ones. It may bring loneliness, but for the first time, that loneliness becomes bearable. Because it's filled with you, not the absence of others. You begin to see who remains beside you when you're no longer convenient, who really listens when you speak, not for effect, but for truth, who can withstand your honesty without trying to reshape it for their comfort. Authenticity is not an ending, it's a beginning. A beginning of life without conditions, without pretending, without tension. It's not always beautiful. Sometimes it comes with tears, breakdowns, breakups. But none of these are signs of weakness. They are signs of return to yourself. Montaigne wrote that a person's greatness lies not in how they appear, but in how they regard themselves when alone. And in solitude, you can't lie. When there's no audience, no mirrors, who do you feel you are? A performer craving attention, or someone who no longer needs approval. You can't be half authentic. You either walk into that fire and emerge cleansed, or you stay forever among shadows, playing a role that may earn applause, but no longer feels like yours. And now, if you've come this far, don't ask yourself a question. Make a confession. Yes, I am afraid to be real. Because authenticity strips away guarantees. It makes you vulnerable. But damn it, only in that vulnerability do you finally stop being a copy. You've moved through the layers, taken off the armor. Watch the walls you built for years start to crumble. And now you're left with very little: vulnerability, silence, honesty. But it's from this, and only from this, that something truly yours can begin. What you once called yourself turned out to be a role. Deeply performed, carefully perfected. You played it for years, forgetting that it was just a performance, but now you're behind the curtain, the spotlight is off. And for the first time, you're not in character, not in function, not in defense. You are simply you. Strangely enough, life doesn't begin with achievement, nor with right decisions. It begins at that raw, almost bare moment when you're left without your usual supports, without should, without the right way, without what will they think, when there's nothing left to hide behind. And there, in that empty space, you hear yourself clearly, maybe for the first time, not the voice of anxiety, not your parents, not society, but the one that's always been there. Silent, waiting beneath the noise. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it simply is. It sees the world not through expectations, but through presence, through being, through truth. You're learning to live again without the guarantee of success, without a script, but now with a new understanding. You have the right to be. Not to be someone, just to be. Michel de Montaigne, in his tower, wasn't searching for answers. He was seeking truth. He didn't fight the worlds. He challenged the illusions within himself. And in doing so, he discovered something essential. A person is not the role they perform, not the opinion others hold of them, not the success they accumulate. A person is movement, a pulse, a moment of presence in which they dared to be themselves. You might lose much: images, false connections, old supports, but what you'll gain is infinitely more precious, because for the first time you'll begin to live, not exist, not conform, not endure, not survive, but live with risk, with pain, but also with real joy. Now you have no more excuses. You already know that the cage was inside you. The fear was yours. The role you played, it was voluntary. And that means the way out is in your hands too. You can no longer pretend you don't know, don't hear, don't feel. You can't keep watching the days pass where you are absent, because once you've tasted authenticity, you'll never settle for the fake again. Yes, you can go back. Pretend this was just a thought, just a philosophy, just an idea. But somewhere inside you, something has already been lit, and it won't go out, and you know it. Yes, being yourself is frightening, but not being yourself is far worse. The path back to yourself isn't quick or linear or easy. It never truly ends, because every day you'll face the temptation to wear the mask again, to please again, to hide again, but now you have something you never had before: a choice. And in that, a strength that was never truly yours until now. Because now you know freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's being who you are, even if that's inconvenient, unfamiliar, unstable. Being yourself is the most dangerous and the most necessary act of living. And now, at the end of all this, what you deserve is not applause, but silence, because in silence, there's everything. In it, you hear your steps, your heartbeat, your breath, the present. And before we part ways, ask yourself not a philosophical, but the most simple and most honest question. If not now, then when will you finally begin to live as yourself, not as the version of you the world taught you to be?